The evening air in Samcheong-dong was sharp, laced with a faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor down the lane. Hidden between rows of art galleries and boutique shops stood a cafe that seemed almost frozen in time. Its brick facade was weathered, ivy climbing lazily across its edges, and through its wide glass windows, warm light spilled onto the quiet alley. Inside, the wooden tables carried the rich fragrance of freshly ground beans, and a mellow guitar strummed from hidden speakers. Enough not to intrude. This was where Chae Soo-bin chose to meet. Away from the blinding cameras. Away from the rehearsed lines of press conferences. She slipped into the cafe wearing a beige wool coat and a soft scarf. Her hair loosely tied back as though she wanted to appear ordinary, anonymous. But nothing about her presence was ordinary. Even with no makeup, there was a quiet grace in her features. A kind of vulnerability that seemed etched into her eyes. She settled into her corner seat, wrapping her hands around a cup of latte she did not drink. For a long moment, she stared at the swirling foam as if trying to summon the courage to begin. And then, in a voice barely louder than the hum of the heater, she spoke. "I don't usually talk about him," she said. "But everyone already knows. Don't they? Everyone knows about Goo Ja-wook." The name lingered between us like an uninvited guest. Goo Ja-wook, once the nation's baseball prodigy. Photographed under stadium lights. Hailed as a star with both talent and charm. To the public, their relationship had seemed perfect. The glossy paparazzi photos. The fleeting glimpses of them together at restaurants in Gangnam. The stolen smiles caught by cameras, all painted a picture of a fairy tale couple. Fans admired them. Tabloids crowned them the golden pair. But perfection was a mirage. When it ended, Soo-bin continued, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I thought my whole world had collapsed. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was like someone pulled the ground from under me. I told myself love was something I would never risk again." She did not go into detail, careful to protect both herself and the past. Her words carried the weight of betrayal, of nights spent staring at the ceiling of her Hanam-dong apartment until dawn blurred into day. Curtains drawn, phone ignored. In a silence that felt suffocating. Work became her refuge. Shooting schedules that stretched past midnight. Rehearsals that left her too exhausted to think. Endless fan events where she wore a practiced smile. Alone. However, the mask crumbled. There were nights I cried without knowing why. Just the thought of opening my heart again made me panic. I wasn't angry, I was scared. Scared of being broken again. For months, she lived like that. Until fate, or perhaps chance, placed Yu Yan Suk in her path. Their first meeting was hardly the stuff of romance. It was on the set of a variety program in Saigon, where bright lights hung overhead and staff rushed about with clipboards and headsets. Soo-bin sat quietly in her seat. Lines rehearsed. Her posture flawless. Then came Yu Yan Suk, tall, broad-shouldered, holding his script as though it were a lifeline. He greeted the staff with polite bows, then promptly dropped his cue card. Not once, but 3 times. The white card slipping from his fingers to the floor. He looked so different from his dramas, she recalled. Her lips curving faintly. On screen, he's so composed. But in real life, he was clumsy. I remember thinking, what is he doing here? During breaks, he tried to start conversations. His jokes landed flat. His timing awkward. She nodded politely, offering no more than a strained smile. Later, he approached her with a bottle of water, only to fumble the cap and send it rolling under a camera crane. She bent down, picked it up herself, and handed it back to him. At that moment, she admitted, I told myself, no. Absolutely not. I wasn't going to let anyone in. Especially not someone like him. But destiny, mischievous as ever, was not done with him. Weeks later, their paths crossed again in a rehearsal room in Gangnam. She had accepted a guest role in a drama. And to her surprise, Yu Yan Suk was cast as one of the leads. The room was filled with murmurs. The shuffle of script pages. And the clatter of pens against paper. Soo-bin sat with her head bowed, determined to remain unnoticed. Yet she felt it, his gaze flicking toward her. Cautious, almost protective. At first, I thought he was just being nosy, she said. But then I realized, he was checking if I was okay. That kind of attention, subtle and unspoken, was something she hadn't felt in years. But her heart resisted. When he offered her coffee one morning, He returned proudly with a steaming cup, the wrong one. A bitter Americano instead of her usual vanilla latte. She drowned it in sugar packets, thanked him politely, and watched him scratch his head in embarrassment. Another time, he texted her encouragement after a grueling shoot. Not realizing it was 3 in the morning, she woke to find not 1 but 4 messages. "You did amazing today." Followed quickly by, "Sorry, sorry, sorry. Didn't mean to wake you. But really, you were great." Her instinct was to scoff. Before she knew it, she was smiling, alone in her room at dawn. It was strange, she confessed. I told myself not to care. But somehow, I was waiting for his clumsy texts. Even when they annoyed me, they made me feel lighter. The moment that broke her silence came one late night in Mapo. Rehearsals had dragged on until nearly midnight, and the building was emptying out. Exhausted, tried to juggle her heavy script binder, tote bag, and leftover costume pieces. Seeing her struggle, Yu Yan Suk rushed over. In his haste, tripped over a chair, sending her papers flying across the floor. "I should have been angry," she said, shaking her head. But instead, I laughed. For the first time in months, I really laughed. So embarrassed. But that clumsiness, it broke something inside me. A wall I didn't even realize I'd built. Still, fear shadowed every smile. Each time she let herself enjoy his company, panic followed. At home, she sometimes cried, terrified that she was repeating history, walking toward another heartbreak. He didn't know how scared I was, she admitted. Every step closer he took, I wanted to push him away, because closeness meant risk. I wasn't ready. But Yu Yan Suk's persistence was unlike anything she had known before. It wasn't grand or insistent. It was patient. One evening in Incheon, after a day that seemed endless, she slipped out of the studio and sat on a bench near the lot, her body heavy with fatigue. A few minutes later, he didn't speak, didn't try to cheer her up. He simply sat beside her, handed her a packet of tissues, and let the silence speak. That moment, she whispered, was when I realized, love doesn't have to hurt. Doesn't have to be loud. It can be simple. Even silly. Days that followed blurred into each other with rehearsals, late-night shoots, and public appearances. But in the midst of the relentless schedule, Yu Yan Suk's presence became a quiet constant. Grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but in the small, almost invisible ways that seemed designed to chip away at the walls she had built. He remembered the little things. Freezing morning outside a studio in Ilson. He pressed a steaming cup of tea into her hands before disappearing into makeup. On a rainy afternoon in Gangnam. Peered out of nowhere, holding an umbrella that kept tilting in the wind, nearly knocking into passing pedestrians. She scolded him for not holding it properly. But inside she found herself biting back a smile. There were the tangerines. A paper bag full of them left at her door one evening. With a note written in his untidy scrawl. They said vitamin C helps when you're tired. Don't skip meals. She wanted to ignore these gestures, to tell herself they meant nothing. Yet every time she tried to convince herself, the warmth lingered. I was scared of him because he wasn't trying to impress me, she confessed softly, her eyes distant as though reliving those days. He was just himself. And that honesty was harder to reject than any show of perfection. Her fear, however, remained stubborn. The wound left by Goo Ja-wook was still raw, and comparisons haunted her. Goo Ja-wook had been smooth, effortless, dazzling in public. Yu Yeon-seok, by contrast, over his words, dropped things constantly when caught staring. And yet, she admitted, his imperfection unsettled her most of all, because it felt safe. And safe was unfamiliar. Nights in her Hanam-dong apartment became battlegrounds. He'd sit by her window, looking out at the Han River glittering under city lights, and replay his awkward smiles in her head. The laughter they brought frightened her, because it meant she was letting him matter. She would whisper to herself, don't be foolish. Don't forget how it ended last time. But no matter how hard she resisted, he was there. The turning point came one autumn evening in Busan, where both were attending the film festival. Cameras flashed, red carpets unrolled, and fans screamed their names. The screenings. After the obligatory photos, she slipped away, clicking softly against the pavement as she wandered toward Hyundai Beach. The air was salt-kissed. The waves crashing under a sky littered with stars. She stood alone, breathing in the sea. When footsteps approached, it was Yu Yan Suk, slightly out of breath from running to catch up. He didn't speak at first, simply stood beside her. Days following the restless ocean. Minutes passed before he finally said, his voice almost lost to the waves. I'm not trying to take his place. I just want to be someone who makes you smile again. Chest tightened. The words touched a part of her she had tried to bury. Her instinct screamed at her to walk away. Protect herself. But her feet remained planted in the sand. For the first time, she didn't retreat. She let the silence stretch. Waves filing the space where her fear had always lived. Yet even as something fragile and new began to grow, the outside world intruded. Rumors spread like wildfire. Fans spotted them leaving rehearsal studios together. Conversations lingering at cafe tables in Apgujeong. Their proximity at festivals too close to dismiss. Tabloids printed headlines dripping with speculation. Chae Soo-bin and Yu Yan Suk, more than just colleagues. Online forums buzzed, dissecting grainy photos, analyzing the tilt of her smile, the brush of his hand. Scrutiny terrified her. Memories of her past romance being dissected by the press resurfaced. She had endured it once. She wasn't sure she had the strength to do it again. There was one night, she admitted. I told him we should stop. That I couldn't handle the rumors. That I was too tired to explain myself to strangers. She expected him to argue, to insist. Maybe even to confess something dramatic. But he didn't. He simply nodded. His expression unreadable. And said, I'll wait. Even if it takes a long time. It was the quietness of that promise that unsettled her most. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't pressure. It was patience. And patience was a language she didn't know how to refuse. Weeks later, when she sprained her ankle during a rehearsal, brushed off concern, insisting she was fine. That evening, rolled across Seoul, rain lashing against her apartment windows. She was startled by the doorbell and opened it to find Yu Yan Suk standing there, soaked to the bone, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and a small first aid kit in the other. You're ridiculous, she scolded, ushering him inside as he dripped rainwater onto her polished floor. Maybe, he admitted, shaking his hair like a drenched puppy. Let me at least check your ankle. What followed was both comical and touching. He fumbled with the bandages, dropping the tape twice, wrapping it unevenly, apologizing each time. She laughed through tears. Not because of the pain but because of the absurdity of it. This man so utterly incapable of being suave, yet so desperate to make sure she was okay. Right, she said, smiling faintly. Realized love didn't need to be grand. It just needed to be real. The weeks that followed deepened their unspoken bond. They weren't officially anything, not yet. But the way he carried extra snacks to rehearsals, the way he looked for her in crowded rooms, the way she found herself replying to his late-night texts without hesitation, all of it spoke a language that neither of them could ignore. The confession, when it finally came, wasn't staged. It wasn't under the glow of fireworks or in the glamour of luxury. It was in the back garden of a small Itaewon restaurant. After a dinner with friends, the group had dispersed. Only the two of them under a canopy of string lights swaying in the night breeze. I like you, he said, his words clumsy. Hands shoved deep in his pockets as though they might steady him. Not because you're famous. Not because people talk about us. I just like you. The way you laugh even when you're tired. The way you keep going even when you're hurting. I like you. Don't want to keep pretending I don't. She wanted to laugh at the awkwardness of it. The lack of poetry in his delivery. But when she looked at him, really looked, she saw no pretense, no mask. Just raw sincerity. Told him I was scared. She whispered. And he said. Then let's be scared together. But let's not let fear stop us. Her voice cracked as she remembered pressing her forehead to his shoulder. Tears slipping down her cheeks. Not of sorrow but of release. Release of fear, of loneliness. Of the belief that love was something she could never risk again.